Good afternoon. I'm Randy Horton from Orthogonal. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Injecting Compliance into Code, Automating Compliance with AI in the MedTech Software Development Lifecycle. We have a really lively discussion coming up today, I can tell you, with three very interesting original thinkers who have very different perspectives on the world, some complementary, some in disagreement, but I think we're going to have a really good discussion today. Want to welcome you all here. We'll start, I think, by asking each of the three panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Eris Kaminsky.
Hey, Randy. Thank you so much for the invite, Bernard and Randy. My name is Eric Kaminsky. I'm the founder and CEO of Ketryx, like you see here. We help people accelerate regulated product development like medical devices through the power of AI. Used to lead AI at Amgen, and before that, I built developer tools for a company called Wolfram Research that builds Mathematica and Wolfram Alpha. I've been using natural language tools to code for the last 10 or 12 years because we had a lot of these kind of features in Mathematica at the time. And really excited to just sit here and have a discussion about what people are doing in 2026 to develop regulated products and medical devices and how that's changing how they're thinking of their work. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. Larkin.
Yeah, hi, Larkin Lowry, CTO of Orthogonal. I've been in software for 30 years. I spent a lot of that time building product development organizations in the software space. And I would say that the transition that is happening, transformations with AI, are very reminiscent of really the radical transformation that was going on during the dot-com era. It's actually going to eclipse that by orders of magnitude. So I'm really excited to be talking about what that transformation looks like.
And Bernhard.
Yeah, so I'm Bernhard Keppe. I'm the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. I got into the medical device industry somewhat by accident about 15 years ago. And previously had been, I'd worked at Microsoft, I'd worked at, various companies that were doing things that were outside of medical device, but we had all of these best practices that we kept developing that made it faster and safer to and less error prone to develop software. And so once I got into the medical device space, it was very interesting that a lot of those things were just not there in the space and weren't moving very quickly into the medical device space. So my mission in founding Orthogonal was really bringing those best practices into the medical device space so that we can move faster without breaking things and improving patient outcomes faster. So Orthogonal designs and builds software as a medical device and digital ecosystems around medical devices for medical device manufacturers. We work with startups, large companies that have gotten into the SAMD and connected device space. So a lot of what we do is build, but we will also co-build with folks, and we then also enable large companies to move faster with the resources that they have, build out kind of lean, mean SAMD machines for those folks. Over the last few years, AI has gotten more and more a part of that, both a part of how we develop things, in how we increase both safety and effectiveness of what we're doing in our product development life cycle. And then the other part of it is actually, AI in particular now, agentic AI as part of the devices that are being developed as well. So two kind of sides of the same thing. So very excited about this conversation. Certainly Larkin and I talk about this all the time and are heavily working on that, and very much respect what Eris and Ketryx have been doing in this space, both in terms of their product and how they're working with clients, but also things like the the AI conference you guys put on last year. So thanks
Thank you.
for helping lead in this space as well.
Absolutely. So for those of you who haven't been on the monthly orthogonal webinars before, very briefly, we really try to make this focused on value for you, what's of interest to you. One way we figure that out is because you submitted questions beforehand or you put them in the chat now. We will try to incorporate them as we go and not just sort of take questions at the end. It makes it a lot more lively if it's not even just a chat between our panelists, but all of you are joining and kind of chipping in as we go along. If we call you afterwards and ask for feedback, please pick up the phone or answer the email. It's really the way we make these webinars better for you in the future. We're going to pack in the remainder of this hour. Our goal is to pack about 4 hours of content into 1 hour, as always. The first 45 minutes or so, I'd say, the discussion, I think, is going to go more big picture. There's going to be some philosophical stuff, although very interesting. It's not going to be like, my apologies to those who find philosophical debates interesting. It's not a philosophical debate. It's really thinking about what is AI fundamentally changing in the future of our work and how is it changing it. The last 10 minutes or so, I'm going to try and bring it a little more home of like, hey, what can you do tomorrow if in your organization? What can your organization do? So it's to try and give you some more practical things to think about. Please feel free to reach out to any of us afterwards. We're all on email, you probably have, or LinkedIn. So let me start with a question for all of you as panelists. What's different this time? Like Larkin, you had said this is going to be bigger than the internet era. I happen to agree, having lived through that. But what has fundamentally changed here that makes this just not the next incremental leap?
Well, it's the change and transformation about how we think of ourselves and the value that we are contributing to our businesses, to our customers, to our industries. There's been a prevailing attitude about our work that I call the individual contributor brain, right? The IC brain. And it's where we think about the manual products that we produce, right? We produce a specification, or we produce some code, or we produce a UI visual design, or we produce a product, right? Depending on what level, where you are operating within the business. But what we have to do instead is transform our thinking to, instead of looking at our own value as our work product that we're producing, we have to look at it in terms of how we can direct a multi-agent system to produce the output that we used to produce ourselves manually. And that our value is no longer the ability to do the manual work of producing those outputs, but it's our ability to effectively direct and manage a collection of digital labor, our own digital workforce. And it's really causing us within Orthogonal and other businesses to really transform our people from being software engineers, quality system engineers, to being what we would normally call a leader in that space, right? A manager of quality systems engineers, or a director of software engineering, right? We need everybody to have that level of thinking and operate at that level, because the agents are going to do all that manual work. So it's really the challenge for me is transforming how the individual thinks of their own self-worth, and being able to let go of that value being associated with their manual outputs, and now being associated with what the agents under their direction are able to produce.
I think for me, it's really like the outcomes. Like I'm seeing things that I would never imagine seeing even a year or two ago. Like teams are working very differently, or doing 2 times as many products, sometimes 3 times as many products. And I think for our industry, the core problem is a challenge that LLMs are good at solving, which is kind of writing these very natural language text files that explain what a process or a product does, and how have you proven that it's a high quality process and a high quality output. And I think AI is particularly good at doing just that thing. And the challenge now is, how do you actually do it in a safe way, right? And it's not just the Wild West, and outputting more and more because we need these things to go into people's lives and monitor their health. Um, the other part to that is just the scale in which it's affecting software development. And software development, product development are all similar disciplines. And so we're getting that benefit of the horizontal uptick in productivity. And then we're figuring out how to do that in medical devices, pharma, and other kind of highly regulated industries.
Yeah, I would add to this, right? Kind of where were we with AI ML kind of prior to LLMs and then agents on top of that, right? This was very much of a kind of point solution kind of thing, where we were, where it actually took a fair bit of time to get to the point of generating something that was valuable, and then you had to put it in that particular point, right? If you are, trying to see how to um, where are the vertebrae on a on an X-ray image, and how to put screws in there for the back and things like that, right? Those types of things, you can really do something great with AI ML, but it's a point solution, and the process of generating something was was kind of, slow, laborious, took time. Now you can with appropriate context and large language models, generative AI, and then agents, you can get to the point of you can generate something very quickly, and you could deploy it very quickly in existing workflows. So that part is a much faster feedback loop, and then you can say, oh, let's add some context, let's do all of these things. The ability to sort of more broadly affect things in a process, um, and the ability to then iterate very quickly on that and get feedback on it is frankly tremendous. The challenge, as Eris alluded to, is how do you do this safely? How do you do this in a way that it's not garbage in, garbage out, or most of the time it works, but 5% of the time it doesn't, and you didn't notice that it didn't work. So that's the new challenge. Much more power, and at the same time, with great power comes great destructive ability as a result of that. So that's the challenge we have, and in particular in the medical device industry, both on the what's in the product and how we develop the products as well.
So let
And I
me,
think, Bernard, that
go ahead.
just one thing to add to that is like a lot of the methods and tools that are being developed right now are really not aimed at products that have really high reliability requirements where 5% might not sound enough if you're doing an e-commerce business, as long as it's not touching the payment, or a website or an ad website, but it is a lot if we're talking about insulin delivery. And
Right.
I think that's really hard because, what you read in the blogs doesn't really apply necessarily what you're doing here.
Well, what is really fascinating is that the outer world has actually discovered design controls, or rediscovered it almost by accident. I find it fascinating hearing people talk about doing their vibe coding, right? That they start with a PRD, right? Their product requirements document, and they document very clearly what the product should be, how it should work, and they document their acceptance criteria. And these are people that if you had told them and hired them to a job and say your job is to write a PRD, they would have probably rage quit right on the spot. And yet they've learned that in order to effectively use agent development, that's how they have to function, right? So, I think medtech in general is really in the best position of any industry to really take advantage of agentic development because we already know design controls. And
Yeah.
everybody else who doesn't is having to learn it really for the first time.
Yeah, and it's funny, Larkin, because we're seeing companies, very large at scale companies that have a substantial amount of design controls are able to now use agents to clean up their entire code base very quickly and upgrade it and fix all the bugs because they know what it's supposed to do. Like they already have really detailed spec-driven development, so to speak. I think part of that, Larkin, comes from the fact that now with AI, because the output is so immediate, you can see how much you need the kind of design inputs and the different factors that make you create a high quality product. And another point I love to make about this is if you read like Anthropic or anyone else's prompting guide, and you put it side by side with some system engineering handbook to understand how requirements are supposed to be written. You're supposed to have actors and intended use and all these different things that seem almost the same. And I feel like maybe whoever generated the first prompting guide with an LLM, it basically sampled around a bunch of systems engineering guides because it looks almost exactly the same, and many of them are the same terms even.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think the reason why this is happening is like if you look at the timeline, like 2024 was really largely about help me write this code. I'm writing the code. I want you the LLM to help me because we really weren't doing a lot of agentic work at that point. 2025 became no, don't just help me write the code, but write the code for me. I'm going to tell you what I need. You write the module for me. By the time we got to the tail end of 2025 with OpenClaw in particular, it became don't just write the component for me, but write the whole feature for me. So now, we're at the stage in 2026 where we're beyond just write the feature for me, but it's helped me define the feature. We have multi-agents that are working together to define really even what the feature is. It's not unreasonable to think that 2027 is going to be about figure out what the feature should be, right? And you're just providing the guardrails and the North Star, the direction, and the agent is doing the work. So part of like where OpenClaw has really accelerated a number of these things is that people were essentially having to turn the safeties off. You tell the robot, you can touch any file, you can visit any website, you can go and buy things on Shopify. If I need to buy something on Shopify, go for it. And people were having to be comfortable with letting the agent go off and essentially run amok. You're not really quite sure what it's doing. And in fact, what's fascinating about the orchestration system Paperclip is you basically you form a company, right? And you structure the agents as if it were a company, and you give them budgets. You can't spend more than $500 a month, right? Whatever it is, and it could go off, and it could be ordering things, subscribing to things, and whatever. But the real challenge is making sure that when it is off running autonomously, that it's not going crazy and causing damage. It's not deleting files, corrupting data, which it does do. And I think where we are at this point and where the rest of the industry is, software industry, is how do we manage and control those risks of an agent running amok, right? And again, it's, the things that MedTech knows are exactly what is needed here.
Well, there's an a, a reason why this is happening sort of in the core of software development first and then propagating out within our industry and more generally, right? Which is there was always cowboy coding and there was always bad software development, but over time, doing things at scale with complex systems and lots of change, people learned how to do that fast and build lots of automation, lots of checks and balances into it. That's what you have in good software development, in test-driven development, behavior-driven design, test automation on all of these things. It's already highly digitally enabled with kind of checks and balances around that and risk management for catching bugs early and shifting things left where they need to be shifted left. Putting AI on top of that or extending it is a lot easier in those circumstances because there's not as much garbage in, garbage out that you have with that. And we've already been down that path. One of the things we've seen, and Erez, you've probably seen this as well, is when we're looking at the work on requirements, on risk management, on kind of more of the quality activities, that same level of, I wouldn't say it's the same level of discipline necessarily. I think those people are quite disciplined, but the sort of digital aids that people have for their work aren't there. And so as a result, the quality is of that work is lower, right? Just as the
Mhm.
work of a developer's that quality would be lower if they, if they didn't have regression testing and integration testing at check-in or periodically, those bugs would propagate as they used to do, and now they don't. I think that's one of the great things we can do now as we extend this beyond development, is actually increase the quality of the quality
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. Like our first set of use cases were around software and AI development and cloud and embedded and mobile apps. Um, and over the last 2 years, we've extended a lot into hardware development, into other types of systems outside of medicine, into other workflows that are in the quality domain, systems engineering, regulatory. Like today, you can make an 510(k) E-Star submission draft from all these source documents or source data artifacts, and you can have an AI review it, a different agent, a different auditor, a different assessor before it comes to you. That's one workflow we're seeing very successful. Another one is every time you create a design control or any kind of other kind of QMS artifact, you have an agent review it for basically two things. One is expert quality review to make sure it's rigorous, it's smart, it's all these things we want it to be. And then two, to make sure that it's consistent and not conflicting with other parts of your system. That task is actually not feasible to do by a person, at least in not any reasonable amount of time because of the complexity of systems, right? A lot of medical device systems or automotive systems or pharmaceutical systems have thousands and tens of thousands of requirements and specification. And an LLM could do that in a few seconds or minutes, but a person would take many weeks and sometimes many months to do that review for a single new requirement. Um,
It's
and
kind
I
of
think there's,
systems engineer in a box, but
yeah, and I
but
think the role of system engineer is changing. I think, people talk about a lot in SaaS that like um, the designer is becoming a product manager and the product manager is becoming a developer and the developer is becoming both. Here, we just have more roles that participate in the life cycle, and we're seeing the same thing. The system engineer becomes quality and kind of development or R&D engineering. The R&D engineer or the developer becomes system engineers in quality and participate in all these different aspects. And I think it gives folks more ownerships and more of an ability to be an architect, and not like just someone doing a particular task.
that raises an interesting thing. I hadn't thought of this before, but one of the things that is always a challenge when you have subject matter experts that aren't fully devoted to a project or a team, and they come in periodically, um, that they're going to miss things, or their input is going to be less good because it doesn't come at the right time, et cetera. And so how do you balance that? You can't have like 50 people full time on a project where really they're only being used 5 to 10% of the
Yeah,
time.
and especially in supporting roles. And I think me and Larkin have
Yeah.
actually talked about this in the past about how hard it is to, you're a system engineer or you're someone in quality, and people expect you to one day work on a surgical robot and the next day work on a web app. And, you're supposed to participate very deeply. And I think it's really, really hard. And what ends up happening a lot of times, you're reviewing content for like technical, I'd say, language and not technical accuracy. And I think AI allows you to do that much, much better because it's very easy to understand the context and think about why it's fixed. And also basically like an AI that does expert quality review just fixes all the time you spend on technical, content review, and then allows you to spend much more time in critical thinking.
Right, right. Yeah. And that goes back to Larkin's, your role is changing. You aren't necessarily there simply because 13485 or 62304 and you can follow the rules. The agents and the AI can really follow the rules if things are clear and unambiguous. But there are going to be gray areas, and there are going to be things where you really have to say, okay, well, that's a little different. That is really where you end up, needing people for those things.
So uh, it's a good webinar when I have to struggle to get in to shift us to a new point. But I think we're raising an interesting point because we're talking about the changing roles of people. And Era, as you said, it allows you to do more senior things. The question is, does it require you to do more senior things? What are the elements of success? Given that I'm going to have try and have some empathy and assume some people in this webinar might have their stomachs churning a little bit right now, like, what the heck is my job going to be in 2 years or next year? So let's talk about a little bit about what makes for a successful medtech professional in this context.
I think it's a person who understands the rule system you need to operate under in a quality system, understand how to automate a lot of that, and understands how to work with a myriad of AI agents to do this work and help others do that as well. And also can think for their organization, how did that change? I see like one really great question from Tony here. How does spec-driven development differ from waterfall via automated code generation? I think a lot of it is just about doing smaller chunks of work and then seeing how they work and using that to inform the next set of specs. And that's exactly this type of work of like, how do you take many of the great concepts that are in waterfall, chunk them more to do smaller bits of them, and then use that really fast output you're getting to inform the rest of the process and the rest of the specifications. I think it's also someone who has this understanding that the systems we're building are becoming so complex that no one can design all the requirements for a very large, Larkin, you're from the diabetes world, for an integrated cloud-based pump app CGM system. No one actually can get all that, grok all that in one place in their head, and then design all the requirements and how they integrate and connect to each other to execute correctly. But you could do that well as long as you keep on simulating it. And maybe the last thing I'll say that really excites me is how simulation is going to come to medtech. We've wanted for a long time to have simulation all over life science. The problem is that unlike aerospace, we don't make one very large capital equipment. We make many, many different projects, many, many smaller things. And so the cost and effort related to simulation has been prohibitive. But now, in the same way that you can write code to execute a device operation, you can also take your CAD or take your requirements and design a simulation with AI that is as robust as you need it to be in order to do all these work streams. And again, get that back into your design loop.
Right. And being
Yeah.
able to do experiments and be willing for an experiment to fail, right? Because in the purely manual era, it would be prohibitively expensive to go and try something very speculative, right? Take the waterfall approach, you're making a big bet, you're having to invest a lot and commit to a plan. But if you can achieve the same thing as an experiment in an afternoon, which is literally the types of things that we're seeing with agentic development, you're able to do a lot more experiments in speculative areas and take some risk. Will this feature work plan out or not? It's very liberating.
I still, yeah, I still think, if we think about it, at some point we had waterfall development, then we moved to agile. Why did we move to agile? Well, there was uncertainty. Both things might change or we had incomplete understanding of things. And so by chunking things into smaller things and potentially evolving something, we could, maybe adjust our requirements, adjust how something worked, et cetera. We could make trade-offs, et cetera, on things. And that was sort of the power of Agile. That's why Agile ended up, basically being how people developed software. And then we ended up with all of these, again, automations that allowed us to maintain quality while we are moving fast. Now, what's happened is that the cost of actually doing the coding and development has gone way down, right? So the question is, can we move back to waterfall? Is that now the right way to go? Or is it we can just evolve faster because we don't have to worry as much about the code whether our requirements are good and whether the end result of that is good is still, ultimately what we care about. So I would contend that it's still better to evolve. We can just do those evolution loops faster. Things like simulation help with that. Uh, any of the things we can do to sort of get faster feedback loops end to end help us with that. The fact that coding is as a part of that, where the first part of that is less, it just costs way less to do, makes that much more feasible. Then we'll get to, okay, now the next layer out, and the next layer out becomes easier and faster, as Larkin was talking about. Well, maybe we'll, the specs get generated automatically, and human factors and risk analysis, there's additional automation around, et cetera, so that we're getting, we're able to apply those fast feedback loops to more of the product. I don't know what that will look like in 5 years, but I'm expecting, this is not just, right here in the middle of the dev process. This is kind of end to end product development where we'll have more and more impact.
So I think a key point you all are raising, just to put a finer point on it, is the economics of what it takes to develop a medical device is changing significantly. Things that were very expensive and took a lot of time now are relatively cheap. It's also creating new costs and different costs. But we should be thinking about what was hard and what's easy to do, because it's changing a lot, and I find a very useful framework. I'm a big fan. There's a pair of books at the University of Toronto, Prediction Machines and Power and Prediction, that talk about the economics of decision making in AI, and they say that we never really thought about it because it never mattered. But decision making is two parts. It's prediction. You take the information you have and you say what you think is going to happen. And then there's judgment, which is say, okay, now that I have that, what am I going to do with that information? What's my decision? And we're separating those out now because AI has made prediction really cheap. On the other hand, it's also probably creating a shortage of good judgment because there's a lot more judgment to be had the more predicting you're doing.
I will say that a certain part right now of the product life cycle, right? The R&D part, and post-market surveillance, all of those things, I think, are right now getting, we can have a tremendous impact on. But if you look at the overall costs and the timelines, right? In many cases, generating clinical evidence, regulatory submission, reimbursement, commercialization, all of those things are huge costs and time issues for us. So what we're talking about is a particular piece of that. If you look at the overall cost of getting a product to market, it's a substantial part, and it's a substantial part of it, the overall timeline, but it's not more than 20% of it in most cases. It's all the other stuff. What I'd love to see, and it's not my area, although we deal with lots of people outside of that, what does that look like? Are there things that can be done there to accelerate some of these things? Some of those things are kind of, policy and how CMS and FDA and insurers and hospital systems, et cetera, work, that may be, something where the use of AI just makes each of those parts of the system more efficient at what they do, but don't make the system overall more efficient, sort of
Yeah.
will magnify misalignment.
And I think, you took the example post-market surveillance, where people have done AI for post-market surveillance for about 10, 12 years. There's actually a big FDA initiative through MDIC for that. But now things are totally different. Like we're talking about, everybody is doing that. And I think people also see over time that they need to modify the rest of their life cycle to make effective use of that post-market surveillance technology, because if like your whole life cycle is not a, differentiable um, manifold, so to speak, like you can't actually adjust it, that makes it very hard. And like if it's all in documents, it makes it very difficult to actually use all of this technology. And I think we're seeing the companies that are becoming more data and artifact driven and more AI driven end to end are just seeing, yeah, massive improvements. Let me like share some numbers. Like we see companies that are reducing the amount of time they spend on documentation by over 80 and 90%. We're seeing companies that are releasing between 10 to 100 times faster on software. Um, we're seeing companies that are doing 2 to 3 times more products, even in large scale manufacturing companies. And I think they're noticing that the output is much better because at the same time, they're finding traceability gaps all the time and realizing that they didn't implement certain functions and are showing, bug reduction in the real world. And like, kind of what more do you want? If we can do more product safer, I think that's what patients need from this industry.
Yeah.
So let's piggyback on that and ask the firecracker. I'll throw the firecracker in the middle of the room. But is the question, is AI as good as a human to replace the human or to replace the human for certain tasks? Or is that the wrong way of thinking about it? Is human judgment and quality the gold standard? I'm going to sit back and enjoy this one.
So oh, go ahead.
Well, look, we had a discussion about this earlier, Erez, I think you made a really good analogy before on the chess side. So I don't want to steal your thunder on that. I'll turn it over to you for that as a point. I really like that particular point.
Yeah, I'll just say that this is a question that comes up a lot. I don't think AI is better than people in the things that people are good at, and I don't think people are better at AI in the things that AI is good at. It's a very easy example. Like, let's start with an example of requirement conflict detection. It is not possible for the human mind to read 5,000 requirements, remember all of them, and then tell you if you're conflicting with some of them um, in the span of, let's say, an hour or a day. And even I would say at any span of time, because the only way they can do that is going, not reading 5,000, but they go and compare one by one, which makes sense. And then it's very easy to forget if one of them conflicts partially with something, and then requirement number 4052 also conflicts in some ways with something. Um, and we're in an era where systems are so complex that something has to change in the way we work on them. And I think that thing that's going to change is the partnership between people and AI and the way they work together. Um, Basically, there's this old study that everybody brings up of how Deep Blue won against Garry Kasparov many, many years ago in chess. Um, what people keep on not mentioning is it's not just about the best machine in the world versus the best person. It's also about an average chess grandmaster using an average computer beat both Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue consistently. And so I think the question is not here, is the best computer in the world better than a person? It's how do people and robots, AI systems, software, digital entities work together to leverage each other for the best type of output? And I think down the line, that would lead us to rethink what a quality system is and a need to develop a new type of quality system, which is what we're building here in Ketryx that allows people and agents to interoperate more seamlessly.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head, right? I think the thing that I'm sure lots of quality and regulatory folks are asking themselves on this, especially if they are not, you know, knee deep in, come from a software background, are using AI, doing things with AI, is how do I describe these tools? How do I validate these tools? I have paradigms for doing this. How do I manage risk around this? What could go wrong and how do I manage that risk, right? And that is an absolutely fair uh a fair thing to ask, and I think it's a key thing to ask and for us to address as we're doing this. Right, this is something that, a lot of other industries, you don't have to ask those questions. Tools validation is certainly in regulated industries something to look at, but it already happened once we started looking at online tools that change periodically, right? That the nature of tools validation might need to change. It's not a just do software validation once and forget about it. You never have to do it again. No, you might have to monitor periodically. How can you detect if there are issues? All of those things started happening. Uh, Now we do this with agentic AI and LLMs. We're talking about another level of that as well. So having the right frameworks for doing risk management, both risk management, but also monitoring how good is the output, what the effectiveness of them becomes a key thing that an organization internally needs to do. The nature of tools validation has to change if you're really going to do this. And it's also something that I know we're talking about in standards bodies and in organizations like AdvaMed and MDAC and others, and in conjunction with the FDA. So
Yeah, and I could tell you that already today, the very best companies in AI, in medicine, that some of them are really dominant in the amount of AI products they have. So they have significant internal processes for continuous validation and CSA and risk-based validation. They do validate a lot of their commonly used high-risk internal AI tooling use cases. They validate them automatically in a way that runs every week or every other week, and are able, as a result of that, to use statistical methods to prove that they can rely on them more and more and remove some needs in the same exact way that we rely on manufacturing lines, automation, and many other statistical systems that are used all over drug manufacturing, medical device manufacturing, automotive, and anything else. People have been using AI to decide if a drug vial is good or bad for 10 to 20 years. And we're now just going to use other AI models to do other parts of our life cycle that is GXP in nature.
yeah,
Right,
that,
but LLMs are different, right? LLMs were trained on human behavior. They were trained on the text that we write, the audio, the speech that we make, the images that we produce, right? It is trained to, in a sense, it's essentially to mimic human behavior, rather than correlate a feature in an image or something like that, right? And because of that, the LLMs do have a lot of characteristics of human behavior, but they also have very different characteristics because they have much greater context windows. They can remember more things, keep them in their heads simultaneously, as Erez mentioned. They can operate much more quickly. They can, anyway, so they have capabilities beyond what a human has. But a lot of what we do in the processes that we have, when it was purely a human world, was we had human factors, right? And we would have mitigations to the defects that humans, have, right? Our brains are squishy, we're unreliable, we fail in a lot of very embarrassing ways constantly. And we have developed a set of processes that help to mitigate these risks that we introduce by our human failability. When we look at the agents have some of those too, but they also have their unique issues and failings. And so I really do think that beyond the analytical and statistical methods that Erez was talking about, we need to basically have agent factors, human factors and agent factors, and we need to look at the behavior of agents from that type of a lens, because that's, I think, going to be able to characterize and describe failure modes of an LLM that a lot of our traditional methods would not be able to detect.
Yeah, and I think you need really robust eval sets and also to run them all the time. And at the end of the day, run statistical process control over the drift and all these other factors that you're talking about, to make sure that, things are getting muddled while they update models and while your use case
Right.
changes.
Yeah, it's a different way of, it's a different paradigm than what we had for software validation previously, which is a really old paradigm, right? The way it is described, it was already somewhat out of date for for anything that was like for the cloud and things like that, right? Or for mobile operating systems, things running on mobile operating systems where not everything is under your control. It is now we just dial it up to 11
Yeah.
with this stuff. We really need we've through, say, Amy TR 115, hopefully coming out a little later, we already have like the start of a paradigm shift there, but I think we have a bunch more thinking to do about that as we move along. So, um, one question I have, right, for folks, right, there is the to be state where it's all transformed, it's all AI everywhere, AI and humans working together in perfect harmony, and everything's safer, etc. But in the meantime, people have to get from, how do you what do you do, where do you start, what makes sense, right? For because your developers are going to want to move really fast on this stuff. They're excited about it. They are mostly early adopters of things, and your quality organization rightfully is a little bit more conservative about that stuff. Where do you start on this stuff if you're if you're not there already and you're
Yeah.
not fully bought in as an organization?
Yes, I'd push back on the fact that quality people, sometimes I see quality people leading the charge or regulatory people because they have so much work associated with the thing that the LLMs do well, right? And your kid is doing homework with AI, and it's very clear that something can be done here. So we're seeing it in both ways. And I think overall, it's all about deciding how can you prove enough value. And now we're transitioning in the AI hype cycle into the ROI phase of things. And I think starting with a small product line or a very software-centric product line that has rapid iterations is very helpful to prove value to then expand to other use cases. And I think the other part, so you either can go kind of end to end on one product or go workflow by workflow on many products, and then prove it out and expand the scope of the usage.
Right. And something that's really important is that there is not an out of the box agent that will do what you want. You have to define the agent's persona. You have to define what it does, how it works, how it thinks, what you expect from it. And that, I think, is ultimately going to be what is significant IP for companies. Every company, at least initially, will be developing their own agent personas. Of course, you can hire Orthogonal and we can help you do that. But, and there may eventually come a time when there are firms like Ketryx that are basically licensing agents for development or quality work or whatever it is. But that is where I think people need to focus. And it's been a really fascinating exercise for us because it has required us to very precisely define the roles of our organization within the organization. Whereas, we make a lot of assumptions with humans. Well, you've had this type of job at other companies, you've done the work, you just implicitly know a lot of what the job does. So we don't define it very precisely because we just assume you're coming with that in your hand. But with the agent, you have to tell it everything. If you don't, it will just try to guess and make up things, and it'll read a blog post from 30 years ago or something and make up something unless you tell it very specifically what you want it to do and how you want it to behave. So I think it's a good introspective exercise for all roles within the industry to really think about what is it that you do and how do you do it and how can you explain it to an LLM so that it can do what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the uh Eris, have you seen, so the workflow by workflow one, right? That is the uh, that that's kind of, it feels like where we are on a lot of things, because there are parts of the workflow where it's relatively easy right now to say, just let the robot do it, as it were, this piece of it, right? And there are other parts of the workflow where it's like, hey, the agents are here to sort of check my work or to find certain things where I should be devoting attention to, right? And those are sort of, the less I wouldn't say peripheral, but more, if you think of the development as the sort of crucible, the core where inputs turn to outputs, all of the other things around it feel more like that right now, right? But as we get better at that, and those become more automatable and more, we're better at managing the risk, I can see that those will likely turn more, uh, the robots doing the work, and we are overseeing and managing instead, as we go out, right? So I don't think we're there yet, or at least I don't know anyone in this industry who is taken something end to end and automated absolutely everything. But that's the direction we're going. On
And I
it.
think you'd be surprised. There's some projects going on right now that are truly earth-shattering. 90 plus reduction in the amount of cycle time spent on non-product development activities directly. So there are some of those. I think that people are experimenting and try to figure out. There's some, I think, high growth companies that have figured out ways to do this and are in production. Um, and I think it just depends on corporate strategy and how the particular culture you're in buys um, like acknowledgement and understanding in a technology and is able to drive change and create assurance for folks that it's the right way forward.
Yeah, there's a lot, especially in a larger organization. We see this, right? It's like, well, you've got corporate legal, and you've got, all of the incentives within an organization as they are built right now for the people, uh, that you might need to change around as well. Um, so that it is a challenge, especially if you have lots of well-established processes, and ways of working things and financial optimization you've done for your organization that may not be the right financial optimization going forward.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question, Erez, as a pulse check on that. I completely buy what you're saying, that there's organizations seeing these tremendous results. To kind of use the flippant phrase, for all of those organizations, would you put their code in your mother's pacemaker?
Absolutely. What we're saying, I would say absolutely. I like the way they're implementing is so much more rigorous than what has been done until now. We recently worked with a company that reduced the total amounts of tests run quite considerably by, I mean, orders of magnitude. But what happened is they cover more requirements. The tests are more automated. They run them more often. And I think that as you get into how people do this, there is so many ways we can do this better and more safely. I wouldn't tell you, I wouldn't use a device that is just built by an LLM and go and do that. Like you need some kind of structural assurance, what people call kind of symbolic quality assurance, where you have basically structural checks that the traceability works and your processes are executed correctly that are deterministic in nature to limit the LLM behavior. But if you have that, I definitely think that the end result are devices that have less field anomalies and adverse events, and we're going to see that over time. That just takes time for the statistics to come out. But what I'm seeing, I would use it without thinking twice. I think it's actually better than the gold standard.
Okay, let's field one question from the audience here, because we're running down to a few minutes, and I want to acknowledge this one, and then we can do a quick wrap up. Does this mean the design input, as in requirements, needs to be more prescriptive rather than describing the behavior in order for agents to work effectively?
Needs to be less prescriptive. when you're being overly prescriptive with agents, they produce poor quality work.
Yeah, so think about it, right? We have a structure where we have user needs and requirements, and then we have specifications, et cetera, right? Um, so so you need to be, you know, probably clear and maybe refine your user needs and your requirements, et cetera, right? But then uh it's it yeah, the more you get down to I need you to the more you get down into specifications, the less value you're going to get out of that, right?
Right. Like you want to be providing the agents constraints and guidance, right? Constraints in the term in the form of like what is the clinical or business value you're trying to achieve? You give it a set of acceptance criteria, right? Your solution must meet these following acceptance tests. I'm going to test you on it, right? And when I say being less prescriptive is if you try to over constrain the system by being very prescriptive with your requirements or your specifications, the LLM can actually end up in a gridlock where it has trouble satisfying your requirements if the requirements are actually not that coherent, right? In humans, for a lot of the reasons that Erez mentioned, if you have 5,000 requirements, there's a very low likelihood that all of the requirements are completely coherent, as he
But
pointed
that's
out,
where
contradictory, et cetera. So rather than putting yourself at risk of creating contradictory or incoherent requirements, you're instead focusing on user and business needs and your acceptance tests for what an acceptable result is, what an acceptable output is,
And I think
and then let the
also
agent figure out the
I think
requirements.
also this will force you, Larkin, to write really clearly what are the safety, performance, kind
Yes.
of critical behaviors you're looking for, which is really what a lot of these requirements are, right? They're not supposed to be an overly, um, they need to be as detailed as you need to be to have to achieve the behavior and achieve the constraints for safety and reliability. Um, and they're not necessarily describing every single aspect of your work. And I think that also helps people.
Right.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
it's actually the case where most people, not most, a lot of people that are writing requirements today are so excited about the implementation level details that they make the requirements overly prescriptive. Like they're trying to describe the outcome or the output rather than the outcome. And I think this is as part of, again, the human transformation in this process is really taking that step back and thinking, am I defining the specific details of a feature, or am I defining and describing what the impact in the marketplace is going to be and the impact to patients, right? It's just thinking about it at a little bit of a higher level.
I one of the things we do a lot, right, is we're building, let's say, mobile apps that connect to devices via Bluetooth, right? And we have lots of experience with that. We have seen lots and lots of edge cases because and some of them you care about for certain use cases, some of them you don't, right? We've built that out. Um, but there's also always more information out there, more things that are published. Keeping up with that is not an easy thing for a person to do, right? And saying, oh, in this particular use case, does this apply? Does this not? Oh, there's a new thing. This thing changed that we had to deal with previously. That is the kind of thing where an agent can, with the information you've collected, as well as other information that's out there and the appropriate constraints, can act as a Bluetooth expert in a way that the actual person who's a Bluetooth expert can't do, right? Or and so because it's doing the things that are very easy for it, and then you combine that with an actual Bluetooth expert, it's way more powerful. And the things you would miss and maybe find late in the process, oh, we didn't think about this edge case, you can find much, much earlier. And as changes to your profile or your protocols or certain behaviors to deal with those edge cases, you catch early rather than when you're out, doing field testing.
All right, folks, we've run right up and 1 minute over. So normally I'd have a wrap up, but I think at this point I want to give a clean closure. Aris, thank you very much. We've longtime listeners, first time callers for Ketryx and what you're doing. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. And I'm going to make one quick comment. When Larkin says OpenClaw did all these things, yes, it did. Is it worth looking at? Yes, we are not endorsing or recommending you go install OpenClaw and give it access to your life. That is a let the installer beware. Okay.
Well, especially since OpenClaw has now become passé and Hermes is now the hotness.
Thank you so
But it's the
much,
same problem.
Randy, Larkin, and Berhard for letting me be part of this. Big fan, so I appreciate the time.
Same here.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Take
you all
care.
for
Thanks.
joining.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.